My wife, Olivia, and I are so different. She always does everything right and is always right, while I, as a creative person, always create chaos wherever I touch. And yet, despite our differences, we've been together for 17 years. And it wouldn't have happened if it weren't for one little embarrassment. On our 17th wedding anniversary, the whole family came to our grand celebration. Even dear and beloved Uncle Tyler, my sister's husband's brother, who was legendary in our family, came. Admittedly, few of the relatives were happy to see him. I understand. He was quite a colorful character, a walking fat man on powerful legs, with a bull neck and a broken nose in several places. For some reason, he didn't scare me, and I even managed to find a common language with him. Perhaps it was my powerful charisma. In the process of communication, it turned out that Uncle Tyler and I had a lot in common, much more than my wife and I, with whom we had been together for so many years. By the way, he had the exact same mustache I had when I was young. He reminded me of myself, and I immediately warmed to him. As for the party, it went splendidly. We gathered everyone in our large private house. Many relatives prepared guest rooms in advance so that we could properly celebrate the holiday and then do not worry about how to get home. And my correct and responsible wife prepared a bedroom for us in advance, laid the best linen, arranged everywhere candles, which were to be lit, as I understood, after the end of the holiday. And I drank one glass after another, with excitement and anticipation of a passionate evening. Maybe, at least on our crystal wedding day, my beloved would agree to participate in a little intimacy and would not just lie log. Eventually, in the midst of the fun, I felt myself losing my bearings. Just as I physically began to lurch during the dance, I began to lurch mentally as well. Right during the same dance, I grabbed my wife's sister around the waist, but for some reason, she didn't say anything. When the ground started to leave my feet, I decided it was time for a little break and headed for our bedroom. I thought I would lie down and wait for my wife, and we would finally dance the midnight tango with her in our bed. With difficulty, I reached our room and was surprised to find someone lying on the bed. I quietly called my wife's name. She answered. Unbelieving my happiness, I lay down in the warm, heated bed. It was dark and warm, and I hadn't felt so cozy in a long time. My wife groaned when she felt my hand and snuggled up against me. My wife smelled of some new perfume and looked round it, but I put it down to passion flaring up like a torch. We danced in bed like we'd never danced before. My mind was so foggy that it was hard to think about anything, much less suspect. And then she turned her head, and I realized it was my mother-in-law. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting that. It wasn't what life had prepared me for. After all, what had happened was irreparable. My eyes got used to the darkness a little, and I began to distinguish the outline. My mother-in-law, indeed. Her hair, her clothes. Somehow, I hadn't noticed when she left the party. I was too busy dancing. To my surprise, my mother-in-law didn't say anything. She only sniffled softly. After another minute, her breathing became even. Then I quietly went to the bathroom and cleaned myself up. The guilt still lingered. My conscience was asleep, my mother-in-law too, and I wasn't going to wake her up. There were drunken voices and music coming from downstairs. I didn't want to go back to this mess. I slipped quietly past the hallway, and stepped out into the air. The coolness of the fall evening brought relief. I moved into the darkness, afraid someone was about to come up, and I'd have to have a conversation with them. For some reason, I didn't feel like seeing or hearing anyone. There was a light on in the yard, but no one was turning it on, so I moved cautiously toward the arbor with the grapes. That's where the light switch was located. I was almost to my destination when a sound broke the silence. It surprised me and stopped me at the same time. It must have been my wife's sister and her husband walking side by side. Slowly, so as not to give myself away, I turned around and walked back, and at that moment, I heard a quiet laugh. It was so dear to me that I stood up, as if I had stumbled. On unsteady legs, I reached the gazebo and fumbled for the light switch with shaky hands. The light flashed on, illuminating a shameless picture. My wife, my humble Olivia, who'd never slept with anyone but me, was hanging around Uncle Tyler's broad neck. Their lips were entwined in such a way that it was hard to tell which was which, and his tendrils tickled her nose. His wife froze and turned around. She looked at me fearfully and turned pale. Uncle Tyler wiped his lips with his hand. He said I better leave, or they would eat all the cake, and walked away, leaving me in tears and my wife blushing. My wife thought she was talking to me, but all that came out of her mouth was drool, and then she burst into tears. It turned out that she had been suffering all this time. Our marriage was weighing on her. She wanted passion, emotion, and all she got was me. In addition, it turned out that in the intimate life I am no good, thinking only about myself, and she wants variety. Eventually, she fell in love with Uncle Tyler's mustache. My wife was no longer shy about expressing her emotions. She practically screamed at me, accusing me of all sins. It was the first time I had ever seen my wife so alive and emotional. Not icy and froggy, so cold you couldn't ride a goat, but passionate, deep, and fiery. I wanted to take her right here in this gazebo. And before she could say anything else, I flicked the switch, pulled her to me, and kissed her, then turned her back to me and did what I wanted. It had been 5 years since our mutual infidelity. The truth about my adultery, my wife never found out. My mother-in-law pretended it never happened, though I suspect she just didn't remember. Those 5 years were the best years of our marriage. We finally opened up to each other. My spouse had become more liberated. Her girlish shyness and timidity were gone, and lately we had drifted apart again. It was like an icy wall had formed between us. I poked my nose into it like a blind kitten, but all I felt was cold and empty. But I had an advantage. I knew how to make things right, because today was a very important day for our family. Our 20th wedding anniversary. All the guests were here again. This time, we'd spent even more money. Just expensive alcohol, fancy hors d'oeuvres, and a guest host. And there would be one important guest that I invited personally. He hasn't changed a bit since I've seen him. Same wild eyes, bull neck, blue tattoos, and mustache. My wife's favorite mustache. I know she won't be able to resist. And then we'll be okay again. All the guests had arrived to celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary. I looked around the room, anxiously awaiting the arrival of the special guest I had invited, Uncle Tyler. Soon, the mustachioed figure of my wife's former lover appeared in the doorway. Olivia's eyes went straight to him, her face a mixture of desire and nervousness. I walked over to her and put my arm around her waist. "He's here," I whisper. "Are you ready?" Olivia hesitated for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Yeah, let's do this." We walked over to where Uncle Tyler was holding a reception, telling a group of our relatives his incredible stories. As we approached, he grinned widely. "Well, if it isn't the happy couple," he proclaimed, wrapping Olivia in a tight hug. I watched her melt into his arms, and all her usual restraint vanished. When they finally parted, I stepped forward. "Uncle Tyler, there's something we'd like to discuss with you," I said, and my heart raced. The three of us retreated to a quiet corner. Olivia took a deep breath. "Tyler, I want you to live with us," she whispered. "Both of you." My uncle's eyebrows rose in surprise, but then his face spread into a delighted smile. "Well, well, well, well," he chuckled. "I thought you'd never ask." Olivia reached out and took Tyler's hand, her eyes shining. "The last 5 years have been the happiest of my life, but I want more. I want us to be together, openly, without shame or guilt." I watched with a lump in my throat as my wife and her lover made plans to put our lives together. It was a bold, unconventional move, but deep down, I knew it was the right one. After all, our relationship had never been conventional. Why should our marriage be any different? As the party swirled around us, the three of us stood united, ready to begin this new chapter. I could practically feel the icy wall between Olivia and I melting away, replaced by the warmth and closeness I'd long craved. This was our chance to rewrite the rules, to create a bond stronger than society expected. With Uncle Tyler by my side, I knew we could overcome anything. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt real hope. Our family was going to be so much bigger and so much more interesting